We're back for the second test of the first race of the Michigan Sprint Enduro Series, and this is the Enduro test. So this test is almost entirely woods with just a really short section of motocross track. The start line worker here is really kind, but she's having trouble seeing my number because my GoPro is in the way. So she has to get up and crane her neck. I tell her as I go by that I'm going to take care of it before I come back to this test again. As I was waiting my turn at the starting gate, I noticed a lot of riders bobbled here in this little section of woods. It's kind of a steep little uphill with a bunch of roots. And I saw a rider stopped. It was kind of a tricky section because you had to stay smooth on the throttle while you were turning sharply in a couple different directions, and it seemed to catch a lot of riders. Granted, I'm starting my rides with the C class, so probably some of those riders are not exactly hard enduro specialists, but I did manage to make it through every time when I went without bobbling, so that was nice to get a good launch because that section is after the antenna. So it counts as part of your time. You see I'm catching a rider here. This rider's relatively close to my pace, so it takes me a little bit to get up behind this rider, and particularly because this section here is pretty fast and isn't very technical, so it takes a little time for me to gain enough speed, but I end up stuck behind the rider for just a little bit. Now if anybody knows this rider, I want to be clear, I'm not complaining about this rider or how they let me go around. I think initially they didn't even know that I was behind them because I hadn't indicated, revved up, or yelled or anything to let them know that I wanted to go around. And then when they did realize that I was behind them, I think they tried to push it through a little tight section here to get out of my way. And they didn't really see an easy opportunity for a safe pass when we went through. And I'm glad that I don't have to worry about getting tangled up with some of these handlebars. I'd rather wait a few seconds. But this does illustrate a point. I'm not racing against that rider. That young person is in a class. They can't be in my 50-plus class. And I'm racing against the clock and the other competitors that are in my class. So unlike a pro section here, there's some mixing of different C classes, and I don't know who is in my class and who isn't sometimes when I'm on the course, so I'm really just trying to race the clock. That illustrates another point, is that the time between my finish and the next finisher in front of me was only 17 seconds for about 90 minutes of riding for the day, and there was only about 2 minutes between me and the top finisher in my class. So sometimes these little transactions in the woods, even though we're doing time trial style starts, do actually matter. If I'd gotten hung up behind that rider for longer, it could have had an impact on my finishing position for the day. I will also say I made plenty of bobbles and mistakes during the day that cost me much more than 17 seconds. So I don't want you to think I'm placing the responsibility of my position on another rider, because I'm not. And it is my responsibility to pass the other riders that I come up to safely when I get to them in the woods. Everybody for the whole weekend was very polite, and it was obvious that they were caught and they were slower than me. They moved over immediately, and I tried to return the same for anybody who caught up to me. I tried my hardest to make sure that didn't have any impact on their progress at all. At this point, I'm actually reeling in another rider in front of me, which I guess is good, and I'm able to catch them. They pull over for me, and there's nothing that really says that you have to completely pull over. So what I've been trying to do as other riders catch me is to find a spot where I can sort of hesitate, let them around, and then just keep going, so that it doesn't cost me as much time. And very often it seems if I pull off the trail completely and stop, I'm more likely to kind of get caught in the little berm or have a steering problem that takes me more effort to get straightened back out. So it's actually kind of nice if you can find a place in the trail. The other thing I wanted to note here is that there are some harder features on this enduro section. And I don't know if I'd call this full-on enduro, and it's definitely, there's nothing here that's really hard enduro. In fact, a little later, there's even some bypass sections. So there's a log bridge, which I think I skip on this test. The log bridge kind of scares me, and because it's been slippery for me in the past. And if you get one tire on one log and one on the other, you kind of slide sideways the whole way across the bridge, which is alarming to me. But and there's also some enduro features with some big tires and and logs and other things. I skipped that this pass too, although I like to take those at least once every race just to say that I did it and get the practice. I'm not going to get better at doing those kind of things if I don't ever try them. And I just take the time penalty, if there is one, for going through that section, even if I bobble or have a problem when I go through. And this rider pulls over completely and stops, and that's what I'm kind of trying not to do. Don't get me wrong, I appreciated that the rider moved out of the way, but I'm trying not to do that when the other riders come up. And as far as these more difficult sections go, it's a little confusing sometimes when you start because you have to walk a little ways into the woods in order to check this out. And sometimes the bypasses are kind of long. I mean, they're intentionally made so you can't just rip through the bypass and get a significant advantage. And in fact, it's typically a punishment to take a bypass rather than to take the harder portion of the trail, which is fine with me. But you don't always know exactly what you're getting into when you take a bypass. So it can be kind of a surprise how many switchbacks there are, how it winds through. And there isn't much leeway in this type of racing either. You can't cut corners. You have to go past or in between the markers that are on the trail and stay in the tape. So when you take the bypass, it can also be a little bit of a risk. So this test is longer than the other one in minutes. So this test was typically taking me about 18 minutes to complete. The cross test was taking me over 12, about 12 and a half minutes to complete. That's significantly slower than the fastest riders, obviously, but I actually think I'm suited to the longer tests, and I feel like I do better here as time goes on. As long as I can get over the initial arm pump of the first test, I'm actually usually still feeling pretty good even at the end. And the speeds here are lower, so I'm on the trail longer, even though the mileage is actually really close for both tests. So it's just the fact that there's no motocross track here, and you can't go nearly as fast in order to complete the test as you go through, so you're on the machine longer. I might feel differently about the longer times if it was really hot outside. And in the case of the weather for both days, we were pretty lucky in that we were starting the day in the high 40s or low 50s, and I think the highest temperature we got to was about 77 degrees. So it's actually pretty nice, good weather, not too sweaty. And I do wear all of my gear, including a full pressure suit, while I'm out on the course. So I probably have some of the hottest gear of anybody that's out there. But I do occasionally make mistakes and fall off or crash. And I have had a few occasions where I think the pressure suit has saved me, probably from some minor injuries, nothing serious. But it's still nice to have the extra insurance and not end up busted up to the point where I can't ride or do other things that I want to do. Another rider catches me here in a second, and I'm immediately disappointed when I pull over. Not only do I pull over and let the other rider go right before a bypass for a little rock garden, but I, for some reason, also take the bypass. And as I take the bypass, I quickly realize that I could have tailed this rider for a little bit and possibly been able to go a little quicker and kind of follow their flow if I hadn't shot over into this bypass, and the rock garden path didn't look like anything I would have had any trouble with. So for the rest of the weekend, I ride the rock garden every time I come here, and I don't have any issues. So I kind of made a mistake there that cost me some time, and it cost me a rider that I might have been able to follow. And that sort of brings up another point, is that I like to let the faster riders pass me, particularly when they haven't caught me because I've made a mistake and I'm kind of hanging off the side of the trail trying to get back on, but because they legitimately caught me because they're quicker. Because sometimes, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes into a test, these riders are not that much faster. If they've only made up 15 seconds or 30 seconds on me during all that time, I may be able to follow their lead, so to speak, and that can be an advantage. It gives me a chance to rest if I can watch their motorcycle and know when they're coming up on, bumps and other things in the trail or turns, and I may also be able to emulate them and go a little bit faster. I do miss a flag there, by the way, and that's technically not allowed. So I made a mistake there. That I should have gone back on and come back in around that marker, and I must not have seen it while I was on the trail, because I'm usually really careful about not cheating the system there and making sure I'm between the arrows when I'm supposed to be. One thing I've discovered is that this motorcycle definitely responds well to motocross style cornering on the sharp turns. Anything approaching approximately 90 degrees or sharper, it's really a good idea to move way forward on the bike. Stick out your leg if you can, and you can kind of steer the machine a lot better, and I can go a lot faster with a lot more flow through the curves if I do that. It does mean I have to move around a lot on the machine, so I've kind of been practicing moving my body position to the right position for what the motorcycle needs in order to do this. It is unnerving to me still to stick out my leg when I'm in the woods. If I'm on a motocross track, I can tell there's no trees or obstacles around. It's not as big of a deal. When I'm in the woods, I still feel like I kind of have to have a feeling for what exists on the curve of the corner, or I'm not willing to stick my leg out. And I'm just worried I'm going to catch it on something or somehow injure myself. It might be a false worry, but it's still important to me that I, don't stick my leg out in inopportune time and then end up hurting myself. I've gotten better at doing it in the woods. A lot of these corners, even though they're sharp, you can kind of scout them out and see what's happening, or I can remember from the previous tests, and then I can stick my leg out. That helps me take a little bit more aggressive approach to going through the curves. And if I get into the right body position and I use that aggressive approach, it saves a lot of energy. If the motorcycle washes or kind of bobbles on the curves, or I get over the berm, it just seems to wear me out a lot faster, and that slows me down a lot more overall. And I'm passing a rider here. I suspect they're going to catch me again in a minute. Coming up here, I think I get pretty lucky. There's a sharp left-hander, and I am able to stay between the arrows here, so this is legal by the rules. And I'm able to get past a stopped rider, and another rider who looked like they probably held up managed to get moving, so I was able to slide my way through a more technical area there without having to stop and wait for traffic. One great thing about the time trial format, there isn't traffic very often, so it does limit the amount of time you spend waiting in the woods for other people to clear obstacles. And it also means I can concentrate on my own business and try to do a good job of clearing these obstacles efficiently without getting hung up. And it takes some pressure off me too, so if I do make a mistake, I don't have riders immediately on my wheel. I'm always a little nervous when I pass a rider who appears that they're stuck on a technical feature though, because a lot of the portions of these trails are a little higher speed and don't require that much technical work. So it could be that they get stuck on something and then they're right behind me. So every time I go through a section and I pass a rider like that, I kind of have to swivel head for a little bit and make sure they haven't reappeared behind me right on my rear tire. catch up to a rider here that appears to be stopped on the side of the trail. I'm not really sure why. They weren't quite completely off the trail, so I just stopped and hesitated for a second to make sure they were okay, and they looked fine. Then shortly, I come up to a bypass. This person, I'm assuming they're a worker, but I'm not sure, just immediately points me into the bypass. That's fine with me because the bypass is really short. I'm already now right here, already back on the main trail, so it doesn't cost me much time. And that bridge is often very slippery. I could see as I approached and turned right into the bypass that it was all sort of polished on the top. On day 2, I ride that bridge every test. So it gets better. I think they may have thrown some dirt on it, or maybe just all the motorcycles roughened it up enough that it wasn't as sketchy. But I was able to ride it, and it wasn't nearly as bad as I remembered. I'm approaching another rider in front of me, and one thing I notice as I get closer to this rider is that sometimes they pull away from me. So there's certain sections that they're able to accelerate faster than I am, and the distance increases. And that happens, of course, when there's a slow section and then a fast section, because you're still stuck in the slow section as the fast section is under the rider in front of you, and they take off away. But here's a perfect example. The rider put some pretty good distance on me, so I'm thinking I got less than 2 minutes left in this test. I might just be in the right place, and maybe this rider just had some issues on a technical section, but they pull over and yield the trail to me. So now I'm kind of under pressure here because I need to make sure that I'm not holding the rider behind me up for the end of the test. So I also don't want to get too involved. So I've been taking this bypass, and this bypass goes around the big enduro sections. And I don't want to do this every time, but I think this time is a good time to do it because I didn't want to be under pressure with a rider behind me, trying to make it over big loader tires and log piles and firewood and all the other things that are part of that test. But this winds around for a little bit, so it takes some time to get through. They're not going to make a bypass super short where you can avoid all these technical issues. And at this point, I actually don't know if the rider behind me has taken the bypass or not. I see somebody stuck there in the tires. I kind of check to make sure I'm clear, and then I slice right back into the main trail so that I can finish up this test. But the rider behind me didn't catch up to me, so either the route they took was longer or it was the right decision for them to yield the trail. It could be that they were kind of pushing it when they were in front of me and just ran out of steam, so they decided to yield the trail anyway, and that would probably be a good case. So now this trail goes back out onto a little short section of the motocross track before it wraps up. I'm still feeling the pressure a little bit as I accelerate into the motocross track because I know I have a handful of riders now behind me that are going to be coming pretty quick. And if I don't keep my speed close to or higher than theirs, they're going to be scrambling for position here right at the end. And it goes through the motocross track and then narrows down into a tight little section right as we get to the antenna. So it could cost me or them time if this doesn't work out. So I'm trying to be accurate but not get so excited that I end up washing out in the corner to get to the end. And I also have to yell out my number because this is my last test with this camera in this position because it's blocking the number plate and making it trouble for the workers that are there. I hope you enjoyed the Enduro test and my video. Thank you.